What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 360. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. LSV, how are you, sir?
Doing well. I'm glad you didn't say it was sunny, because at this point it's like 10:30 at night. So
I'm hedging my bets. Yeah, A, it's late, and B, was it sunny today there?
It was.
Oh, God.
Soon it will be winter.
Yes.
Winter is coming, as they say.
Most definitely coming, and you're going to be bundled up in all types of stuff. I went for a beautiful fall walk today outside of my place. I got some lunch at one of the premier Thai restaurants in Seattle with a good friend of mine. It was a beautiful day. Are you jealous? Just a little jealous?
I would say so.
The air's slightly less thin here. Anyway.
Now all that means is when I come to Seattle, then I can just crush people. Because I'll have that extra oxygen.
We'll go to basketball and you'll just outrun everybody. So we've got kind of a cool show. This is one that we came up with. I think John actually came up with the idea for this, if I remember correctly. And we'll jump in and do them occasionally. It's called a set review, or maybe a set re-review. And we've done one. I think you and I did one, right, Luis? Have we done one before? Yeah, we have. And this is where we take a show to look back at the set review for the current set and go over some of our grades, go over some of our logic, go over some of the cards that changed value for us a bunch, and kind of look at it. And there's important reasons to do this. I'll get to those in just a minute. Before we get into all of that, though, we've got some business to take care of. First things first, our sponsor, channelfireball.com. The premier place on the internet to go if you are into Magic. That's right. They have everything. You can find awesome free content. This is my favorite part about CFB. This is why I started going there back in the day when I first started playing Magic. And frankly, when CFB first started, although I didn't know that at the time, and it's because I could find sideboarding guides. I could find new builds of new decks that I could take to regionals or whatever was going on at the time. And then also the video section really blossomed. I could watch my favorite player, Luis Scott-Vargas, draft completely silly decks on there. And I always found that really entertaining. I remember, Luis, you were the first pro that I was really aware of and the first person that I rooted for when I started watching the Pro Tour, way back in the day. You were my favorite player. Did you know that?
I did not know that. That is pretty funny.
And in fact, I even tweeted it at you at one point. And you replied, and I was like, "This is awesome." That was a very long time ago.
You held me in such reverence these days.
Yeah, well, since then I've gotten to know you. But yeah, that was really what drew me into Channel Fireball back in the day. And then I thought, well, hey, while I'm there, I'll check out what they have in their store. And it turns out full selection of singles, sealed product. You can get playmats, deck boxes, sleeves, all that kind of stuff. Pick up some dice. You can even get apparel. You can get hoodies and t-shirts and stuff. There's a bunch of limited resources, branded stuff on there now since we're partnered up. And, it's all there. Channelfireball.com is going to have what you need. We do encourage you to please check them out there. Also, the show's brought to you by you. That's right. Via the Patreon, if you want to, you can help support the show. It's really cool because it's fully optional. This is sort of how a modern content stream goes now, is that, you don't have to make a subscribe thing where it's like, you don't get the show unless you pay X dollars. It doesn't have to be like that.
At least not yet.
Yeah, that will not happen. But,
to be fair, Channel Fireball is also free. So I like this viewpoint a lot.
Yeah. And I think that there's different ways to do this. And, it's funny when I first showed this to like my stepdad, I showed him like, this is how this works now. He's like, I don't understand. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, but it's free. Like, it's just free. I'm like, yes, but people want to support the things that they get that help make their lives better, that they want to give back for because they appreciate it. There's actual that much people. And he's like, well, it's not that many. I'm like, you're right. It's not, but it's enough, to keep a show like ours going and to make it worthwhile. And this is the world we live in. And we are very appreciative for everybody that helps support the show via Patreon. You can check it out at patreon.com/limited resources. It's easy to sign up. You can set a monthly limit so you never go over your budget and you choose the amount per show. You choose. It's not a thing where it's like, well, you have to pay at least. It's just, you can pick what you want. And that's it. And for signing up, you get a thank you card in the mail. It's a custom card that I had made from our friend Inkwell Looter, and it comes in a custom envelope and all that kind of stuff. You get one of those. And then you also get access to the Patreon feed. And there's a lot of neat little things that you get out of that. And some of them we'll go over right now. The first one is that you're eligible for prizes. And I've been kind of going ham on prizes. I'm just like, we're doing it. And so I got another one to give away this week. This time I'm giving away the Crack-a-Pack Rares, which I put a picture of, by the way, up in the Patreon feed. And also a limited resources deck box and 2 packages of limited resources sleeves and an LR sticker as well. And that, we're going to give that away right now. That little package is going out to Corey Mosher. Thank you so much, Corey. He's from Minnesota. And Corey, thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. And I will be sending that off to you probably early next week. The other thing you get if you join the Patreon is you can submit questions for the question of the week, which we're going to listen to right now. But right before that, I did want to say a quick thank you. We mentioned, earlier, we talked about the survey that we did. And I wanted to say thank you to the person who put together that survey for us. That was Garrett Gardner. That's at GGguards_ on Twitter. Thanks so much, Garrett, for your hard work on that and for being accommodating. Garrett, sent us what we wanted to he sent us like the survey that he came up with and asked us if we wanted to change anything. We added some stuff. We wanted to change a few things around, and he did that. No questions asked, and really facilitated all of that information for us, which of course helps us make a better show. So thanks, Garrett, for that. Okay.
I also want to mention that I don't have access to the Patreon feed, and I hear all sorts of nonsense is posted there. So I might actually have to sign up in order to keep an eye on things.
It's funny. They probably don't believe you.
But it's true, though.
Luis literally does not have access. So like for those of you that are in there, that picture that I posted, he didn't know what it was until last week.
Yeah, until someone made a playmat of it and brought it to me at Grand Prix Providence.
Which I know you felt a little awkward about, but man, it really made my day. Especially given the picture.
Let's get on to the
anyway,
question.
there's a lot of value in there. But one of the things that you do get is you get to submit questions for the question of the week. And you can do them in writing, or you can even do them via audio clip. And we've got one here from Jeff Stumpo.
Hi, Marshall. My name is Jeff Stumpo. I've been listening to Limited Resources for about a year. Luis has always been the co-host during that time, and I just became a patron a week or two ago. My question is really, really newbie. I'm getting ready for my first GP, which is still going to be over a year away from me, and friends of mine who have competed in them before tend to drop if they have a losing record after 3, 4, 5 rounds. I'm wondering if there's any reason to continue playing in a GP after you've gone, say, 1-4, and if so, what are those reasons? Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for that question. That's an easy one, right, Luis? I mean, there's a lot of reasons to keep playing in a GP. What comes to mind for you?
One is you get to play all the rounds. Like, you came to this tournament, it's a big deal. Jeff was talking about a Grand Prix a year in advance.
Right.
And trust me, the first Grand Prix I went to, I started testing many months in advance. That may not be quite how I operate these days, but it is a big deal. You drove, flew, in some cases walked to a Grand Prix. You might not go to another one this year or again. You should play out all the rounds. Like, I definitely advocate playing all the rounds just to get your money's worth, to get the satisfaction.
Totally.
You could also get Planeswalker points, which get you buys, and that does add up. Especially playing at a Grand Prix is one of the better ways to do that, and you get good practice. You're playing against in general higher quality opponents than if you played at like an FNM, for example. And playing in a Grand Prix against those opponents is good practice.
Yeah, the other thing about the practice that came to mind for me was not just the caliber of opponent, but also the idea of getting used to being in a big tournament environment. That gets so many people, that just like their first GP, they feel overwhelmed. They don't have a good feel for the rhythm of it. When the pairings go up, they're like, oh, everybody's moving. Where do I go now? And then they're, running around looking for their seat. And it's a very stressful kind of, they feel out of their element experience for the first time until they get a couple of rounds in. And to me, the quicker you can get that behind you, the more you can concentrate on what's important, which is the magic, right? That's the main thing. And you can learn a lot by playing those last, 3 to 4 rounds, because you'll also learn, how tired did I get? Right? Maybe it wasn't a great idea to draft until 3 a.m. last night. And on the next one, I'm not going to do that. Or, what are the things I forgot? Because it isn't until the late part of the day when you really start to get tired and maybe you didn't bring enough water, you start getting really thirsty, or, you ran out of pieces of paper to write on or whatever. And you start to see, here are the holes in my grand scheme of winning this GP, and you can start to fix them for the next time. So yeah, lots of reasons to stay in. I totally get it why people drop, especially people that go to a lot of GPs, but if you don't get to go to a lot, play it. That's what you came there to do. Okay. Luis, let's get into the set review or the set re-review. Before we get into actual content here, I did want to kind of stay why, right? Why we're doing this and why it's important to do things like this.
The biggest reason is that we are obliged to do a show every week, and that show must be a minimum of 45 minutes. So that is
that is not the we actually had another whole topic going before you and I decided to do this one. So damn well that's not why we're doing it.
Yeah, actually our email thread about topics always has like 3 or 4 we're kicking around, and this actually looked like one of the better ones.
Yeah, and so the reason though, the reason why this is important and why you should reflect on these type of things yourself is because the ability to constantly refine your processes is really important in Magic and in life, to be able to take a look at the way that you do things and don't constantly assume that they're always correct. You need to have some checks and balances on that. Else, if you are making a mistake, you are doomed to perpetually make that mistake. And that's one of the worst things you can do in gaming, right? Is make the same mistake over and over and over and over and over. The whole point of our podcast, one of the whole overarching things that we're trying to have you do is make better plays more often, because it adds up over the long term. And so for this episode, we want to go back and look at some of the reviews that we did for Kaladesh and revisit them in an effort to go deeper and maybe figure out if our approach is still generally good, or maybe if it needs some adjustment. It's okay to say, no, I think we did a pretty good job with that. But if you find a spot where you're like, wait, why did I assume that? I shouldn't have assumed that. I need to make sure next time I don't assume that. That's where, you can really start to move forward. So what we did is we actually asked on the Patreon feed for, any concepts or cards that people wanted us to revisit. And I got a rather overwhelming response in just a couple of hours. It was like 50 responses.
Technically, you asked because I do not have access to it.
That is true. That is true. Might need to fix that. But this was just one place that I looked and I thought, okay, well, there's enough stuff there for a whole nother episode that's not a set re-review. So I will be combing through that to use it as a guideline for what we're going to do probably on next week's show, though it may be the week after if we decide to do like Sealed or if we have a guest next week. But, I'm talking about like, this is real stuff here that you guys asked. Some of it wasn't directly applicable to a set review, but the stuff we got was really good. So for the stuff that we chose for here was more specific to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with Jeremy. Jeremy asks, he says, Prophetic, Prism, and Attune with Ether. I thought they were nothing cards when the spoilers came out, but I've been proven very wrong. So what I thought we would do is we will go back in time and we will listen to what you and I, Louis, said in the set review about both Prophetic, Prism, and then Attune with Ether. And then when we come back on the other side, we'll discuss what we said and think if we were right or wrong. Oh, dude, I did not know this was back. That's great. Prophetic Prism. Yep. Somehow this one slipped through the cracks of my reading. It's Prophetic Prism is 2 mana for an artifact at common. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you can pay a mana and tap it to make 1 mana of any color.
Yeah, this is a great little card. It replaces itself for 2 mana and then it has a very useful ability. It lets you splash. It fixes your mana, because even a 2-color limited deck tends to not have a great mana. Mm-hmm. And it's an artifact for the cards that care about artifacts. It's not a card I'm like going after highly, but it's a card I frequently play. So that lands just as a solid C for me.
Yeah, I think it is a C as well. Also, all the decks that care about artifacts, either existing or entering the battlefield, will love to see a relatively cheap one that replaces itself. So I think Prophetic Prism is going to be right in that wheelhouse. Attune with the Aether is the next one. It's green for a sorcery. It's common. It says, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it in your hand, then shuffle. And here's the thing. You get 2 energy.
I love this card. I think this card's a really good design. It's really clean. It's going to play really well. Normally, you wouldn't play just the first part of this, right? Because playing what is essentially a basic land that costs a green to cast means that if you draw 3 mountains and no forests in this, you're out of luck. But it's close because in a deck with, a lot of green cards and tough mana requirements, maybe you'd play this to play a split card forest / mountain that costs a green. And in a 3-color deck, it's obviously great. But what you end up with is 2 energy, is that little extra nudge, because you can't put draw a card on this. That's obviously just way too good. But adding 2 energy means that the decks that care about energy get this little payoff, little bonus that's well worth it, and makes Attune with Aether a highly playable card if you care about energy.
Would you play multiple Attune with Aether? And if you did, would you adjust the number of lands in your deck?
Yeah, what you can do is, let's say you draft like a sick blue-green energy deck and you get 3 Attune with Aethers. What you can do is play a mana base of something like 11 forests and like 4 or 5 islands, and play like 2 or let's say you play 3 Attunes, 11 forests, and 4 islands. You're playing a 15 land deck that really is an 18 land deck, assuming you draw a forest, and you end up using these to get energy, so they're not just like lands in the late game; they're slightly better.
Yeah. I think this card's really cool too. It's not a power card, right? This is an incremental advantage, sort of subtle type of card that can smooth out your draws occasionally. Maybe fix your mana. It's hard to give this a really high grade. It's just like a C, right?
It is a C, but it's just one of those cards that, like, when I want this card, it's going to make me happy to put it in my deck, which is kind of an interesting way to describe that. But yeah, I'll give Attune with Aether a C.
Okay, so you heard what we said, Luis, about both Prophetic Prism and Attune with Aether. And what did you think? One interesting point that we're going to hit on multiple times here is the grading thing, right? The grades make a lot more sense during the set review, but now they don't hold up as well, I think, because if I were to regrade cards, I would actually be grading it on where I'm willing to take the card in a booster pack, because now I've seen a bunch of booster packs of Kaladesh in front of me. So I have a much better sense for that rather than, in a semi-vacuum like we do during the set review. But I feel like we were pretty close on both of those, even though they've both gone up for me a bit.
I think in terms of analysis, we were pretty close on both of those. We were more off on the Prism because Prism is just a B. It turns out
I have Prism, it as a B too, yeah.
Turns out Prism just goes in so many different decks, makes it these 3 or 4 color decks possible, and just has a lot more synergies than I think we anticipated. The various ways to bounce it or care about artifacts in play. So like both white and black decks end up being pretty happy with Prism. Blue decks want their Gear Seeker Serpents to be cheaper. So I would say that we were more off on Prism. I think I stand by the Attune analysis, and overall I think this format's a little bit more colorful than maybe we thought. So you're going to be, if you're green, especially 3 colors more often than you might have considered. But the real difference here is this Prophetic Prism is just, it smooths out decks and is a little bit more crucial than maybe we even thought. And we were already pretty happy with the card. Yeah,
I think it's funny because all the things we said held up, but agreed. I think it's just even better. It just fit into the format even better than we gave it credit for right off the bat. Okay, good. Let's take a listen to our next one. This one comes from Alexander. He says, can we touch on Longfin Skywhale? I think Kaladesh is a bit too rough for it with Pima Outriders and Renegade Freighters around every corner. So let's take a listen now to what we said about Longfin Skywhale. Longfin Skywhale. This is 2 blue for, this thing's sweet. 2 blue for a whale. It is a 4/3 with flying. It's uncommon. And Longfin Skywhale can block only creatures with flying. Longfin Skywhale does not deign to fall to the ground.
Oh, no. So Longfin Skywhale's great stats. 4 mana, 4/3 flyer is great.
Great.
It is not a defensive card. You're just going to put that, when you put this in your deck, you're just kind of under the assumption it never gets to block, which some decks are more than fine with. 4 mana, 4/3 flying can't block. It's a good card. You're going to put it in your aggressive decks.
That's a huge amount of damage.
I'm not putting this in my defensive decks, though.
No.
It's beefy enough that I think I'd be willing to put it in a mid-range deck because this can kill you by itself. 5 hits, this finishes the job. It also does block flyers, so it's not like it's a 0 on defense. Where that lands me with the Longfin Skywhale is probably closer to C+, just on power level.
I like it. I like C+ for Longfin Skywhale. It's going to do so much damage. Okay, so I predicted that it would do so much damage, and I don't think I've attacked with one of those yet. Maybe somebody else's that I stole with a confiscation coup or something. I got to say, the Longfin Skywhale kind of flopped.
Oh, yeah. It just turns out that blue decks are just not aggressive, like really at all in this format. And I've routinely cut Longfin Skywhales from my deck. So even though this is the kind of card we're not going to like usually evaluate completely accurately because this is just so format or in context dependent. But I mean, I think Longfin Skywhale does what it says it does. It's a good aggressive option for blue decks. Just the problem is there's no blue decks that are aggressive. So I would rate this closer to like a C-. It's still like on power level a fine card, but it just doesn't have a home.
Yeah.
Do you want to give it a D+? Like
I kind of do. Like when I look at it in a booster pack, even if I'm in blue, there's a lot of cards I'd take over it, that are blue or colorless than a long. It just doesn't appeal to me particularly. That said, I mean, it's weird because listening back to what we said about it, I still kind of feel the same way. I'm like, it should be better, right? Like, shouldn't it be better? Like the sentence you said it can win a game on its own. It's like, yeah. Why doesn't it do that more often? It's weird. I guess it doesn't really have any synergies with anything, right? Like that's the start. Like it doesn't make
this
energy.
This is a synergy format, and blue has so little support because Windrake is also just not a card you're seeing in a lot of decks.
No, I'm very down on Windrake also. All right, well that's interesting. Next question comes from Chris, who says, "I'm wondering if Marshall feels less like the vehicles are a trap than he seemed to in the set review." And we're going to actually listen to us talk about two different vehicles here in a minute. But I did want to talk about this because I think this has been, one of the huge question marks coming into the format were vehicles. Just they're so weird and they're so different, from other type of cards that we've seen that, we have kind of a loose connection with equipment of some sort or some type of weird interaction there, but like they can block and, they were very, very difficult to evaluate. And my stance on them is that, no, I haven't really changed that much. I do still feel like by and large vehicles are a trap, not, across the board, but like if you look at the common and uncommon vehicles, right? When we think of them now, like if you and I, Luis, were to discuss the vehicles in Kaladesh, we would only be talking about the ones that we think are even remotely playable. We wouldn't even be addressing,
which is definitely not all of them.
Right, which is actually a very small subset of them, which I think are playable. And we're actually going to listen to a couple of those here. And I think that, Renegade Freighter proved to be the best one of the commons. But and some of the uncommons are pretty decent, but I'm still just not in love with a lot of them. I think they're okay. But if I had to come down on more of a trap or more of a value or a, worth it play, I think that they're, by and large, the vehicles are, not worth the effort in many scenarios. Now, the really interesting part though, is where I have started to really like vehicles, which has been somehow out of my sideboard a lot. I am getting on the Aradara Express to break up kind of an awkward mid-game thing or a deck that's very defensive and is doing a good job of blocking my ground assault and just getting in the train and just sending it into the red zone, rover or whatever, and blasting through way more than I thought I would, especially after having played them early in the format and been pretty disappointed with them.
I think...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that the good vehicles are great, but most of the vehicles are not. And the ones we are skeptical of, I think generally haven't been good. And the ones that we liked have been good, with Skyskiff being kind of an exception.
Why don't we listen to that, actually?
Let's just go ahead and do that first.
Yeah, so I've got Skyskiff and Aradara Express lined up. So we'll just listen to those back to back.
Which one's faster?
Let's listen to our review and we'll decide while that's playing.
Yeah, it's 2 mana for a 2/3 flying common vehicle with crew 1. So 2 mana, 2/3 flyer, and you have to tap a creature with 1 power to crew it. Yeah, this card seems solid.
I really like this one.
It's just like a little flying equipment that it's the one that's at risk, not the original creature. But I think it does a pretty good job.
I do too. Crewing is difficult. It's more difficult than you think when you first read it. You see crew 3, you're like, no problem. It is a problem. It does impose a significant onboard cost for you. But crew 1, I gotta feel like you can just sort of fit that in here and there. And Skyskiff being a 2/3 flyer, that's going to beat down or even block well is just really strong. I don't know. Like you said, I would rate this as like as highly as I would rate a good equipment. You know, not a rare level equipment, but like a solid equipment. Yeah, like I think this is like better, you know, on par or better than like True Faith Sensor was in the last set or whatever.
It's funny because that was exactly the card that I was going to mention.
Oh, really?
Yeah, True Faith Sensor. This feels like similar to like just a solid bit of value. You'll feel good about putting this in your deck.
Yeah. C plus for Skyskiff?
I like Skyskiff at C+. I do want to reiterate that vehicles do have diminishing returns. So if the first Skyskiff is a C+, the second one's still probably about there. But then once you have two, I'm just not as excited about picking up random other vehicles.
I agree. Yeah, the bomby rare ones maybe, but the other ones, I think the equipment is a really good example for that, right? Yeah. Like you don't want 4 pieces of equipment in your deck very often.
Right. That just does not end up playing well.
Yeah. We've got our first vehicle. Yeah, so this is Aradara Express. It's 5 mana for an 8/6 vehicle. This is common, by the way. It's got Menace, and its crew cost. And by the way, we're going to be talking a lot about crew cost and paying a lot of attention. Think of equipment. How much, you know, the thing that you and I always go to, Luis, is the equip cost is kind of the focal point of that. And the crew cost is going to be really important here. It's 4. Which is quite a bit.
Yeah. So one way to look at this, I mean, it's not a 5 mana 8/6 menace, right? That it definitely is not. that it clearly is not. What this adds to the board in terms of how much damage you deal is 4, because you're tapping 4 power worth of creatures to deal 8 damage. So this is adding, you know, in terms of total damage, you can deal 4. The reason it's a little better than that is an 8/6 menace has pseudo evasion. It's hard for your opponent to block. Like imagine they had just like 1 5/5 out, and you had a 4/4 in this. Instead of dealing 0 damage with the 4/4, you're dealing 8 damage with this. So that is clearly a big thing.
Also, a well built out board. If they have like 4 smallish or medium sized creatures, and you've got, let's say 3, medium sized creatures, your attacks into that are rarely good. But if you can play the Aradara Express, crew it up and swing in, they're forced to do some awkward blocks. The Express is more likely to trade off for 2 or even 3 of your opponent's creatures. So it does give you kind of a different angle of attack.
Yeah. And it lets you utilize creatures that wouldn't otherwise be able to do something a little better. Mm-hmm. The big downside here is sometimes this card does nothing.
Yeah. Oh, God. If you don't happen to have 4 power out, you cannot crew it, and it can't block, it can't attack. All it does is you're just paying 5 mana for a card that says Artifact. Ugh.
Right. A card that doesn't affect the board for 5 mana, or a card that even if you think it's going to, ends up not. Like, imagine you have a 4/4, 2 2/2s out, and you play this on 5, and your opponent's like, okay, end of your turn, kill one of your 2/2s or kill your 4/4. All of a sudden, you did spend turn 5 doing nothing, because they can just attack you. And then next turn, if you have another creature, maybe you get to animate this, but maybe you don't. Or maybe they kill a creature again, It's the sort of thing where if they have enough removal, they can pin you down. And a crew 4 is just such a higher bar than crew 3 or 2 or 1. Where do you land on this?
I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't. I think that this looks like one of those like kind of splashy high risk type cards, but with significant downside. Crewing up a vehicle like this to block with is probably not the best option in a lot of scenarios where you would rather reserve the right to block with multiple creatures. Again, these can be killed as well. If you go, okay, I want to block with my Ardar Express, crew it, then they kill it before blocks. You've tapped most of your team and you can't block at all. Now, if you are the beatdown, I gotta feel like if you've got the 4 power or, 3 or 4 creatures out there or whatever, that you're likely to be in a good spot. And all this is doing is augmenting in the way that you can attack. And that does have benefit. It's not 0, but I don't think it's worth a card, and I don't think it's worth the risk. So I think the Aradar Express is going to end up being not very good. And I'm going to give it a D.
I like it a little more than you do. I think that it's the kind of card that's dangerous to have too many of. It's dangerous to put in a deck with not enough creatures. It has some bad matchups, but the power level, I think the power level's here.
Okay. That is a lot of power for 5 mana.
I'm going to give it a C. I'm going to say that if vehicles are overall bad, this is one of the worst. But I think vehicles are overall going to be decent, and I think this is going to be the one you cut the most often. This is not a card I would take early. But in the right deck, in like a 17-creature deck, this feels like a good way to utilize your creatures. So I'm going to give Ardara Express a C. And well, hope to find out soon how good it is.
Right off the bat, we're already a full grade off. I love it. All right. So you heard what we said about both the Skyskiff and the Aradara Express there, Luis. What's your take on it?
Man, those guys talk a lot, whoever they are.
No kidding.
So Skyskiff, I'm definitely lower on than we were. The comparison to True Faith Sensor did not hold up. True Faith Sensor is a great card.
Yeah.
Skyskiff ends up being a playable in an aggro deck. I mean, I think the card is perfectly playable, but it's closer to a C- than a C+.
Yeah. Why? What? Like, I still read it and I still look at it like it should be good, but I almost never, like, I think people pick it higher than I do, so I almost never end up with it in my deck. I don't remember losing to it, certainly not often.
I think the problem is tapping a creature to deal 2 damage, spending essentially 2 cards to deal 2 damage, just not high impact enough. Whereas Renegade Freighter dealing 5, you're kind of like attacking with 2 creatures when you use the Freighter, and 2 creatures dealing 5 is still fine. 2 creatures dealing 2 is just not very good. So
for sure,
Skyskip just does not have enough impact, I don't think.
I agree. It's just too low impact. Now, what about the Aradara Express? You were saying this is one where you and I jokingly said it at the end of the clip, but we were actually a full grade off. And somehow I'm not even where I was there. I ended up not even thinking that it should have a regular grade. I end up having it in my sideboard now. Like, I almost never played in the main deck, which is just another curveball on top of the other grades that we gave it.
Yeah, I think it's a sideboard card. It just turns out it's just the crew cost of 4 just scales up so high. I do like siding it in for when you have two creature-based decks bashing against each other, especially against a controlling deck that's going to try to block your creatures. But, man, Aradara Express just not a great card. No,
it's pretty bad. Yeah, weird stuff. Also, the one other thing I wanted to note in regards to the question that Chris asked is, and you actually addressed this on the review as well. I can't remember if it was in the clip that we just played or if it was in a different part, but it was how many you want, how many vehicles you'd actually like in a deck. And, for me, where I've ended up on average, I would say is between 0 and 1. Like, you'll often see me have 1 vehicle in my deck, one of the good uncommons or a rare one or a Renegade Freighter or something like that. But there's many, many decks where I've played 0 and felt fine about it. I don't feel like, that they offer something unique or great that my deck doesn't get by just playing more creatures or whatever. Like, they do offer a little bit of a difference, but it's just not enough for me to be like, I got to find a vehicle in this last pack. I never feel like that ever. I just do it based on power level and what my deck's trying to do. And, I don't want to play 3 vehicles in a deck. Like, I just would much prefer to not play 3. If I play 2, that's totally fine. But the third one, I'm already starting to look at it like, is it really worth it? If I draw 2 of these, am I really doing what I want to be doing? And the answer is just often, nah. And it's just not really worth the pain of going through it. So that's the other thing that I've really, come down on is which one is this your third vehicle? Because if it is, it just plummets in value for me.
I think that vehicles, yeah, you should travel lightly when it comes to vehicles. I like having 1 or 2, and if you have 3 Renegade Freighters in an aggressive deck, that's probably fine.
Yes, I do agree because it's so powerful. Yeah,
but I don't know. I find myself just not picking your Ballista Chargers all that often. It's just the vehicles overall have been somewhat underwhelming for me. Like the good ones are good, and some decks do want them, but overall, they just have a lot of baggage. And instead of carrying it, instead of putting it in the trunk, I want to echo that. I think we'll probably cover this more when we get to the Sunset show in a long while, and also we'll have a bigger chance. But so far, I'm not a big fan of vehicles. I don't think they play that well, and they're kind of cool, but not like so. Some of them just feel so deliberate. And what I mean by that is I almost can just reverse engineer designing these things and saying, okay, guys, we finally figured out a way to make vehicles. We need to make sure that people play them. And so they're like, okay, so for limited, here's Renegade Freighter, which is just so obviously pushed beyond the limits of what the other vehicles are up against. It's just so much better. I mean, it's better than
maybe most or all of the uncommon ones. You know, it's just like, how is this card this good? Why does it have all these extra bonuses? And my thinking, maybe it's cynical, but my thinking is they just wanted us to play with them. Like, what a flop would it be if they're like, hey, we finally made vehicles, and then just nobody played them because they sucked. Right. And one way to make sure that people play them is to put one in the set that's just amazing. And I don't need to tell you the constructed side of that coin as well. So, you know, so far I found them to be kind of, you know, like I don't really feel super excited. Now, I know I don't speak for everybody, so I won't go on about it. But that is where I'm at with them now. We'll see if that changes by the end of the set. I don't find them terrible. This next one, oh, and by the way, I do want to add, I did realize at some point here that I forgot to do the crack a pack earlier in the show, so we're going to do it at the end. I've got it safely here in my hand. Don't worry.
You know, if you didn't want to give away something to the Patreon subscribers, you didn't have to.
Speaking of giving away something to the Patreon subscribers, Luis.
Yes. I still have a Mirror of Averbrook and Essence of the
Yeah, yeah. Remember on the last show when you said I'm bringing it to wherever we went to Providence?
I'll bring it to Dallas next week.
All right, I believe you. These next two cards are cards that you and I wanted to talk about. I'm not going to play our review of them because we already know what we want to say about them. But the first one is Pillarbug, which we both gave a D, thinking, lifelink doesn't affect combat. It's a 2/3 for 3. It has, you have to pay mana for the activated ability. And also we were kind of on the, thought process of, well, and it only goes in black. This isn't the type of card that you want to play in off color, which I still stand by. But the cards perform much better than a D for me. I have it at C+. I still don't have it quite in the B range, but I think it's like a solid playable rather than a, sometimes doesn't make the cut type card.
I also have it at C+ for a couple reasons. One is the black decks care about artifacts. Having an artifact on the board just makes so many of your cards, work much better. The other is that lifelink, just those little bits of life add up more than I thought they would. So this chipping in for 2 to 4 life a game is great. And the last one is Subtle Strike is just so good with this card. And Subtle Strike was already like a pretty solid card that I almost always play one of and often will play 2 of.
Yeah.
And if you can Subtle Strike to make a 3/4 lifelinker, then you're actually kind of doing it. So Pillarbug has actually impressed me, and I would give it a C+ now.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that you said you liked it was because it's an artifact, and it turns out Black cares about artifacts a lot, and our next card is probably the best example of that, which is Doomed Operative.
Well, before we move on, I do want to ask, what are your opinions on off-color Weldfast monitors and Narnet?
Don't do that. Don't get me riled up.
Like, would you be unhappy if you were drafting those cards?
Yes, I absolutely would. I'm going to say it. I would be. And if I put them in my Esper deck, I wouldn't be happy about it. Why should I be? But I do recognize that there are times when you should do it. That doesn't mean I'm happy about it. All right. Are you done poking me now? Doomed Operative is one of the reasons why we like Pillarbug, in fact, because, this is a card that I really came around on. Now, when we did the review, we gave it a C. Our thought process was, well, sometimes it'll get the nice little bonus, which is true. And also that, I pointed out, I went back and listened to it, but I pointed out during the review that the death touch and the power bump were a little bit at odds with each other because it only bumps power. So oftentimes, a 2 powered blocker is going to block the operative anyway. And if it does, the death touch didn't matter. And death touch doesn't matter as far as hitting your opponent goes. So, and it doesn't matter if it's a 3-power death touch or a 2-power death touch when it blocks. So it felt like, you weren't getting like full value on both of those. But as it turns out, they're just 2 separate things. If you're attacking, then you care about the +1/+0. And if you're not, then you care about the death touch. And they're both good in those scenarios. So it's not really that they're fighting. They're just sort of in different, pools. And it turns out that both of those are very, very good. And I have the card much higher. I actually have it at B- now. I love that 2-drop. I think it's one of the better 2-drops in the set, and I draft it really highly.
I also have it at B-, and one of the reasons is there's just not that many good 2s. Like, all the things you said are true, and there aren't that many good 2s. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things that's also hard to see in a set review is, like, you look at all the cards, and you're like, just assuming average numbers of a lot of these cards, it turns out the shortage of great twos, and this is a great two, makes this a little bit more desirable. But honestly, like, it ended up being better than it looked, even in a world with a lot of 2-drops.
Yeah, totally. Also, the Wombo combo, right? Operative into Pillarbug. Taste it.
There we go.
Next question is from Aaron, who says, I'd like to know if I should be considering Ninth Bridge Patrol in my blue-white skies/flicker sealed deck. I'm finding that the low-cost defensive blue energy low drops serve me better. When do you play this card? And looking back to the review, we gave Ninth Bridge Patrol a D+. And interestingly, I think I would actually downgrade it to a D. I have not been impressed by this card under almost any scenario. I just don't like it. I don't think it's very good at all.
Even in the white-black, like, fabricate, flicker, build around type decks, I'm just not into Ninth Bridge Patrol. It's too much work for too little benefit. I mean, the card is playable if you need to, but it's just really not very good.
Man, I knew we should have gone to the 10th bridge. That's where the real good patrols are. Okay. This next, I've kind of grouped a few of the cards together here for us to talk about, Luis. Build-arounds. There was a lot of questions about build-arounds because of the way that the format's played out. This one comes from Dylan, who says, it seems like Kaladesh allows for a surprising amount of payoff for the more out there cards and combos like Panharmonicon, Electrostatic Pummeler, and Whirler Virtuoso combos, etc. Do you think these cards, or do you think these sorts of strategies are even worth pursuing in this format, or is it better to stick to the normal stuff and avoid the build-arounds? And as a companion question to that, Joel asks, is Panharmonicon actually a viable build-around? So what I think we should do is start with that. And we'll sort of answer Dylan's questions as we work our way through some of these cards. The short answer is, yes, you should totally be building around stuff like this. This format totally allows you to do that, but you do have to be prepared to change. But let's start off, though, with the kind of one of the big ones that got mentioned in both of the questions there, Panharmonicon. Panharmonicon?
Yeah, this is a 4 mana for an artifact at rare. If an artifact or creature entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Okay,
so triggered abilities happen twice. But only if it's from your stuff entering the battlefield, your artifacts and creatures.
So we can clearly slot this into build around.
Oh, no, it's any artifact. Okay, I see. It can be your opponents, though. That usually isn't the case.
Yeah, sorry. Your abilities have to trigger. So sometimes they'll play a thing that makes one of your things trigger, but that's not going to happen very often.
Right.
Mostly it's going to be you playing a card with an enter the battlefield ability and then just getting a second copy of that.
I'm sure there's some dreamer out there that has a plan for Panharmonicon, but I am not that person.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to come together very much. Like, how often is this going to pan out versus you pay 4 mana and get one trigger that's not worth 4 mana the whole game?
Yeah, no way. I'm not playing Panharmonicon. No way.
I'll give it a build around D and say that sometimes you're going to get there maybe like once or twice in the entire format.
Again, I'll see you in a couple months on Panharmonicon. Right. I'll go build around D as well. Well, we did not like Panharmonicon, did we?
Oh, no.
Oh, baby. So the two things I want to talk about here. The first one is that we were wrong.
Is it just one thing that's triggering twice?
No. By the way, I usually catch them, but I actually missed you say pan out when we were doing the review. You snuck one by me.
That's the long-term plan.
Yeah.
It's like, it's somehow in my heart of hearts, I know that even if you miss it, there's a chance you re-listen to it later. And
it boomerangs back and while I'm editing or something, and it gets me. Well, you did. But the first thing I want to talk about is that we were wrong. Right. First and foremost.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's less like a boomerang coming back and hitting you, and more like you finding a $20 bill in a jacket you haven't worn in a while. Let's just make sure the analogies are great here.
All right. I think everybody appreciates you making that clarification. May I make my point now?
I'm gonna wait till you get about half a sentence in, then interrupt you again.
Yeah, I like it. You got a real rhythm for this. We were wrong. There, I made my point. I think that when it comes to I think we were right to put Panharmonicon on the build around scale, but I think it's actually a very powerful build around. It turns out that in the format, there actually are just a ton of enter the battlefield abilities going on all over the place. This was not one of the formats where you're happy just playing vanilla creatures with nothing really going on. The whole energy mechanic is basically based on enters the battlefield triggers. And then you've got, the real dreams with the Cloud Blazers and stuff. And I actually think that Panharmonicon is like an A or an A- build around rather than a D build around that we gave it.
I actually disagree. I think Panharmonicon's not very good. I've tried drafting Panharmonicon decks, and it's not unplayable. I think our initial grade was too low. I would not give it an A or A- build around. I'd probably give it like a C+ build around.
So you have it like mid-level build around, and I have it like high-level build around.
Exactly. I think that there are decks where it can hit A's. All build arounds that are worth their salt do get there eventually. But I've first picked Panharmonicon a few times and generally been unsatisfied with the results. So I think it's more of a card that can slot into some decks. And it's just 4 mana doing nothing the turn you play it. Like, I can't believe I'm the one saying this and you're the one like...
I love this.
Like, just going after these like complicated combos. But I think that Panharmonicon is hard enough to get going, and you need a lot of abilities that help make up for the fact that you spent a turn using it, and there are matchups where it's just not going to do that much, that I have it closer to like a C+ build around, which still means it's a playable card, still better than the D we gave it. I would not give it an A or A-.
Okay, so this is really interesting because when I think of Panharmonicon, I only play it in the decks where it's going to be great. But that doesn't really inform where you should pick it, right?
Right. I'm not disagreeing that it's great in some decks.
And so maybe I have Panharmonicon colored glasses on here because there's many decks that I just would not play it in. Like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you take an early build around card and you attempt to build around it and you fail. Right. And then you just don't play it. So the only times when I have played it is when it's been excellent. Right. And every other time, and I have left it in my sideboard, and I have first picked it multiple times in the format and left it in my sideboard. So I guess you just have to take all my words together. But, I guess what I'm really describing, is the ceiling on it, which I probably shouldn't be, because that's not how we really do the grades. But I really didn't even think that the ceiling was going to be there
the ceiling's,
in the set review. And the ceiling's actually higher than I thought.
And I don't think we really took that into account our first time around. All I know is I took this over a Wispweaver Angel Pick 1 Pack 1 just to see, and drafted a deck where Panharmonicon was great, and Wispweaver Angel would have been like 5 times better every single time.
Yeah, that card's really good.
I mean, I'm not saying Wispweaver Angel isn't a great card, but it's just... Panharmonicon has a lot of work.
It's got some tax, no doubt about it. Now, the other thing that I want to bring up, though, besides just, where that we were a little low on Panharmonicon, or even a lot low, how do you think we did in, evaluating it? Because I actually look back and think like we were pretty reasonable as a starting point for it. I don't think that there's a way that we can really figure out that it's at least a full grade higher than what we gave it without having played it. And I think as a starting point, I'd much prefer to be there than anywhere else.
Yeah, I think that there were enough enter the battlefield abilities that we could have maybe looked at and realized like Panharmonicon has some more powerful applications than we thought. Mm-hmm. But this is going to be one of those hard cards to evaluate. Like we ran into the same thing, pretty much every set we do where it's like, all right, here's the build arounds. They're obvious build arounds. We know they're build arounds because there's no way for a card like Ulvenwald Mysteries or Ongoing Investigation or Panharmonicon or Girper Ether Grid, like to name the last couple sets, aren't build arounds. But some of these cards end up being great. Some of them end up being stone unplayable.
Right.
And I'm not trying to say this as a cop-out because we're trying to predict things. That is what we're doing. It's just hard because a lot of it is so much context, and the context is really hard to see until you've actually like opened the packs, drafted the decks, and played the games.
Moving on with the discussion about build-arounds and that kind of thing. AJP says, how good are the modules? So I decided that instead of playing back our audio for all of the modules, it would just take forever, that we would just go through, and I've pulled the grades that we gave them. So we gave... we had almost all the same grades, or no, I'm sorry, we actually were different. So animation, we gave a B- on a build around. We gave build arounds to all of these, by the way. Decoction module, I gave a D and you gave a C. And fabrication module, the energy +1/+1 counter one, I gave a D and you gave a C+. where are you at now on those? Go ahead and just go down the list on where you're at on them now.
Well, animation module, the rare one,
Uh-huh.
easy A. The card is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
It's just cheap enough to use and has enough applications that I think the card is just wonderful. Fabrication module is a tick below that. I have it at like a B+.
Okay.
And just because that one, again, has a very powerful effect on the board and can kind of fuel itself. Decoction module I have closer to like a C+. Just I have run into decks where it's good, but that requires you not only to have other energy sinks, but also a decent amount of creatures.
And time.
Yeah, and time. It doesn't really make up for you getting behind on board. It only costs 2, but it's not nearly as good as the other two. But overall, these are, quite a bit higher than we first thought.
Yeah, I think they're all a bit higher. And I think I know why. I still think if I look at these in a vacuum, like even animation module, you have to get a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it going to get it rolling, right? I mean, it still takes a little bit of work for the build around part of it. And that's, I think, the best one of the bunch by a lot. But basically, what these ended up being are engines, right? These ended up being places that you can dump mana in the late game for a reasonable or even game-changing effect, depending on which one it is. And that ended up being a really important part of how Kaladesh drafts play out. Because I've seen things, and I'm going to get into this in more detail after our last card here, but, a lot of times it does come down to who can dump mana or cards or generate card advantage or generate board advantage by using up their mana in the late game repeatedly, creating an engine of some sort. And it turns out that all these modules have that aspect on some level, though I agree with your ordering on it, and it's basically around ease of use combined with cost, right? Because Decoction module in the extreme late game can be the most powerful of all three of these, right? If you're, bouncing your Cloud Blazer or whatever, you're going nuts. But, it also is the most expensive and clunky version of them. So that's why it gets the lowest grade. But yeah, it turns out that in this format, that type of thing is really important. It isn't always. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. So yeah, interesting to go back on the modules there. Okay, we've got one more before I kind of want to, we'll do this and then we'll probably do the Crack-a-Pack after that. And then I have one more sort of talking point and then we'll be done. But this next one, it comes from Addison, who says, I'm super interested to hear about Cultivator of Blades again. You were both really high on it in the set review, which surprised me since it's so swingy. Usually a sign it won't fit into your safe mid-range wheelhouse for limited. So why don't we listen to what we said about Cultivator of Blades, then we'll revisit that one. Cultivator of Blades, this one, they spoiled this one pretty early. It's 3 GG for a 1/1 Elf Artificer at rare, but it's got Fabricate 2, so you can effectively have a 3/3 for 5 or 3 1/1s for 5 mana. And when it attacks, you may have other attacking creatures get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is Cultivator of Blades power.
This is another one of the cycle of whether you fabricate onto it or make servos, you're getting bonuses either way. Because if you play this as a 5 mana 3/3, it's a 5 mana 3/3 that attacks and gives +3/+3 to all your other attacking creatures. But if you make the servos and you attack, you all of a sudden have multiple attacking 2/2s. And you can obviously get a lot bigger if you just play a pump spell on Cultivator of Blades before you attack. Interesting card. It's okay. It's the kind of thing that's actually okay when you're behind because it's 5 mana for 3 1/1s, which at least can block.
Yeah.
But by itself, it's actually not that impressive, right? Because it's either a 5 mana 3/3 that doesn't do anything if you have no other creatures in play, or a 5 mana 1/1 that when it attacks makes your other 2 1/1s into 2/2s, which so you kind of need a board to be developed before a cultivator really does something.
Yeah, and you mentioned it that they can attack as 2/2s, but I mean that requires the Cultivator of Blades herself attacking, and you can't figure that she's going to survive combat very often, without some help. It's just a 1/1.
It strikes me as a card you're going to play as a 5 mana 3/3 most of the time because you get so much more of a bonus, and you want a couple of you'll have two other random creatures in play. Play this as a 3/3, and then next turn attack for a ton of damage.
Yeah, and then she might survive. Ability. Yeah, that's really powerful. I agree with you. I think that's what's going to happen for the most part with Cultivator of Blades. You're probably just going to put the counters on it, and as you mentioned, by the way, make sure that if your plan is to use a combat trick that you do it before you attack with Cultivator. If you attack first, the trigger's going to go on and it'll be too late.
Well, to play around them tapping it, you could attack in response to the trigger, cast the combat trick, and then when it resolves,
sure.
it'll be bigger. But
yeah. Good point. Yeah, I guess I meant, you know what I meant. Like, just don't do it after attacks. Still, card seems really good to me.
Yeah, that leaves Cultivator at a B for me.
Yeah, I think B. I actually, I'd go B+ on Cultivator. Like, I like the ability to stabilize a board a bit by having.
I guess a 5-mana 3/3 suspend 1 overrun is pretty good.
Yeah, so that card's good.
All right, B+ on Cultivator of Blades.
All right, so we ended up giving it a B+. So Addison was right. We were pretty high on the card at B+, and I actually have had a chance to play it a few times. I think I'd go a little lower now, but I still think the card's good. Like, I don't know. I actually had an interesting pick where I wanted to see what other people thought of it, and I had a Skywhaler shot or a Cultivator of Blades pick one, and I actually tweeted it about the pick, and I think most people were correct, by the way, and responded that Skywhaler shot was a better pick, and I do think that is the case. But I was curious to see how high people were on Cultivator of Blades, and they seem pretty kind of medium to low on it, at least compared to where I have it.
I also responded to that tweet.
What did you say?
I asked, what would Bon Jovi do?
You did. That's right. Why did you do that?
You take the shot from the heart.
Shot to the heart? All right. Yeah. It's really bad.
I think people knew what I meant.
Yeah, a couple of them did. Everybody else.
Yeah, I would take Skywhaler shot there. I also am still happy with Cultivator Blades. I think it's a B. I mean, maybe not a B+, but yeah, you could just put this in any green deck. It's still 5 mana, make a 1/1 plus 2 more 1/1s with a combat bonus when it attacks. That's a playable card.
For sure.
So I think what we said pretty much stands out.
Somebody sent me a screenshot of them attacking with a bunch of creatures and a Cultivator of Blades, and then their opponent putting Ether Meltdown on it.
See, my question to that person is, why did they decide to then use the ability? It is optional. They could just not use the ability. They
said yes. The screenshot was from the person who had cast the Ether Meltdown, so it was like, I guess I got you.
Yeah, but, I mean, that is funny because they just kill all your creatures, but that you also just don't have to click yes.
You also could just say no. Yeah, just say no. Okay, hey, let's get a Crack-a-Pack in, and then we got a few final thoughts, and then we will be done. This one comes from Charles, who I met at GP Providence. Thank you, Charles, for the Crack-a-Pack. Also, by the way, this is the pack that is going to start seeding the next run of cards that are going to go out for the Patreon giveaway. So this will be the first.
So who gets the cards that I'm bringing to Dallas next week?
Oh, we'll put it in here.
All right.
Or whenever you bring them, they'll go into that one. Let's not commit too hard.
I guess they're not guaranteed to be there.
That's not. Yeah. Revolutionary Rebuff is our first card. No.
Nope.
Don't like this card. Spireside Infiltrator. That's the 3/2 for 2 and a red, and whenever it becomes tapped, it pings your opponent.
It is medium. I mean, the card is playable, but not great.
Well, talk about a great card. This next one is Tasseled Dromedary. Looking good, buddy.
Yep.
I did sideboard this card in, by the way.
It is a playable sideboard card. It is. Yeah, I'm not looking for that one.
All right, this next one's good, though. Ether Theorist, the 1 and a blue 1/3 that gives you 3 energy, and you can tap it, pay an energy, and scry 1.
Yeah, this is ahead right now for me. I mean, the card is fine.
Prakata Club Security, the 3/4 for 4 in black, no. Wily Bandar, the Cat Monkey, no. Though,
a great pack.
Luis, somebody did give me a foil. They just gave it to me at a GP, a foil Wily Bandar for. You know what it's for?
For what?
My monkey binder.
Oh, your binder. Yeah, of course.
My monkey binder. So it is now resting safely in there. Though actually, I don't have a regular one in there yet. So I'm going to steal this one and put that one in there. Also, we're not picking
depriving the listener.
Yeah, well, I only sent him the rares. Or the foils. Anyway, whatever. Foundry Screecher.
I don't mind it. I guess I'd still probably be in the Ether Theorist camp.
God, give me something. All right, here's a Prakata Pillarbug. Would you take that over the Theorist?
No, I don't think I would.
I wouldn't either.
Pillarbug is fine, but...
All right, we found one. Glint Sleeve Artisan. Love this guy.
All right, there we go. Yeah. I would sleeve that one up. That is by far the best card here.
In theory. Accomplished Automaton. I know you like this card, but you're not picking it.
No, I'm not.
Weaponcraft Enthusiast. I've really enjoyed this card. It goes really well in the wide. It's
generally better than Glint Sleeve Artisan just because it has such higher upside with the blink cards.
Yeah, it's worse on average, but you know what I mean? Like just casting it. But man, with the blink cards, with the Inspired Charge deck and artifacts entering the battlefield and whatever, the card's really good. Here's a nice one. Ether Hub.
Well, that's a fine playable, but I'm still very much on the weaponcraft enthusiast.
I am told this is worth between 50 cents and $1, so I will be putting it into the pack with the rare.
Oh, lucky.
Yeah. Here's a nice one. Armorcraft Judge. The 3 and a green 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it.
I think this card's actually pretty close to a bomb.
It's
just easy to draft green-black or white-green and just have a bunch of fabricate creatures and subtle strikes and whatnot, and just play
draw 4
Kujar Seed Sculptors. So I would definitely take Armorcraft Judge here.
For me too. Now we've got another green card at rare. I don't think it's going to usurp the Judge, but it's a pretty cool one, and it is right up your alley. Its casting cost is XX green.
Oh, Wildest Dreams.
Mm-hmm.
This returns X cards from your graveyard to your hand and exiles itself. Again, as you said, XX green. Yeah, this is a fine finisher in like a controlling-ish green deck, but Armorcraft Judge I think is much better.
I do too. I just think, again, you're talking an average case scenario. Your Armorcraft Judge has a big upside, not a low downside, where the Wildest Dreams is actually pretty good. I've had a chance to play it twice now, and the flexibility is great. Sometimes, you just pay your 3 mana, you get back something good. And then sometimes, it's 7 or 9 or whatever, and you're just like game. But the Judge, man, it's a creature. Like, you get all this great stuff on a creature. It's really hard to argue with that. Things that can attack or block and can draw me a bunch of cards. I'm kind of into that whole thing. So yes, we will be taking Armorcraft Judge. Okay. So there's a crack pack. Now, before we go, there was something that I wanted to talk about that this episode kind of brought up in my head and thinking about, what we were going to talk about on this episode and stuff like that. And I wanted to get your thoughts on it too, Luis. And it's a bit of a spiel here, but basically, one of the things that I didn't know during the review, and that you and I didn't know, and we couldn't know before the review, was the polarized nature of the format, right? Some of the decks are really fast. Like Renegade Freighter decks beat you very quickly, even by normal limited standards. They hammer you. And others are really slow, right? I mean, we just talked about the modules. Those cards are slow as hell. They don't do anything. And they're all, mana intensive, yet they can absolutely take over a game in the late part of the game in this format. And so things tend to break down like this. If you have the super dirtily slow deck, you can beat the more mid-range version deck, but you just get smoked by the freighters and the really aggro deck. If you happen to be in that middle deck, you'll have a better matchup against the hyper-aggressive, freighter. I'm just calling them freighter decks, as a shortcut. But you'll lose more often to the really powerful late game of the slower engine style decks. And the solution that I've come up with for this, Luis, has been really weird and not what I thought I would do, but it's actually sideboard. My sideboard has been the way that I've adjusted to these things, because I'm not talking just about the normal sideboard stuff that you see in every limited format, your naturalize effects, your plummet effects, these cards that are kind of these silver bullets against certain types of cards or strategies. I'm talking about dramatically changing, like, for example, the defensive speed of my deck, right? If I'm one of these dirtily decks, what I'll often do is during the draft portion, I'll pick up cards like Tasseled Dromedary or Narnum Cobra that's not on color, or, these just random creatures that I can play in the early stages of the game. And I will have those in my sideboard in case I face down the really aggressive deck. And what I'll usually do is I'll take out my Panharmonicons and, my clunky modules that aren't just like, solid gold in the deck or whatever. And I'll play my cheap creatures that can interact with the stuff in the early game. Another example of it would be bringing in the big bad vehicles that we had talked about earlier, to go over the top of my opponent if I'm playing like kind of the mid-game stall out type thing, or the two slow decks going against each other.
Have you stomped anyone yet?
Have I what?
Demolition Stomper. Have you stomped
I have not stomped anyone.
I didn't think so. Ardor Express is kind of where the train I'm on, but
that's the one I like too.
Demolition Stomper seems like it's going pretty deep. I would like
it is, yeah. I've not done that, but
it's like 10-7 for 6 with Crew 5.
Crew 5
pseudo evasion.
Yeah, and it can't be blocked by small things or whatever. But yeah, and I find myself leaning on my sideboard and looking to my sideboard a lot more often than I anticipated, and in many cases than I have at all before. And a lot of that's because of how many playables we have in sets these days in Kaladesh. Almost every card's playable. there's just so few that are just like, I never want to see that card, that it means you can really draft a deck that is much bigger than the deck that you start off with. And the keys to this for me are to draft not only the silver bullet style sideboard cards, but also the curve changing, game plan changing, type of attack changing cards, right? Every pick you take counts, because especially in the leagues on Magic Online, but even at your local shop, you really can have different versions and different speeds of the deck, even within your same colors. Now, I'll usually start off with the most powerful potential version of my deck and then change when I get information about what my opponent's doing. For example, I'll play my Panharmonicon in my Panharmonicon deck, and I'll play, my modules and the other stuff that's a little slow, but that is ultimately really powerful in the late game and can give my deck a real edge. And then when I see my opponent play Toolcraft Exemplar into 2-drop into Freighter or whatever, I'm yanking that stuff out. I'm like, okay, Whirler Maker, you had a good run, buddy, but you're out. The random module I'm playing is out. The Panharmonicon's out. Like, I'm willing to just bail on those things just to play things that affect the game, even going down the pipe as far as like playing Tassel Dromedaries and stuff. And this is information that I did not have during the set review and could not have. And I think that that's why, we end up changing things in a lot of ways, is because we learn things about the format after the fact. Where have you been at? Have you been sideboarding as much as I have? Like, these are pretty dramatic changes to the deck.
I haven't been sideboarding quite as much as you, even though I agree that the extra playables give you incentive to do so. I haven't felt like there's that many decks I've had where I can change my game plan sufficiently.
Like, do you feel like you give up too much by doing that?
Yeah, part of it is like any deck I have with a module or Panharmonicon in it, I feel like is less likely to work if I take those cards out. I just haven't drafted decks that are kind of in between there. I have sometimes done the transformational-ish thing where you take out like 4 slow cards for 4 fast defensive cards. But overall, I feel like my sideboarding is not quite as extensive as yours, but definitely more than a normal format because, as you said, you end up with 28 playables every time.
See, I think you should, because here's what I've noticed. A lot of the cards, especially the ones that we were just referencing, the Panharmonicon and some of the modules and stuff, tend to make either cards that you're playing better or the strategy that you're playing better. But what I found is that they're not as much of a linchpin for the strategy as I'm used to with build-arounds. For example, Burning Vengeance from Innistrad is one of our favorite cards to reference as a build-around, right? It let you do damage if you flash back cards or played cards from your graveyard. And if you didn't have enough cards to play to flash back from your graveyard, you just couldn't play the card, right? Period. And if you did have a bunch, even though it's a little slow, it costs 3 mana, you couldn't take it out of your deck. You couldn't be like, oh, my opponent's deck's really fast and this doesn't affect the board, so I'm going to take it out. No, you were in on that card. That was how you were going to win the game. But what I found is Whirler Maker, these like super slow cards, and cards like Panharmonicon and even the modules, they often simply enhance. They make my deck much better in usually the late game, but at a significant cost of taking up a card slot and not doing much when I play them, and even for several turns after I play them in some cases. So I've actually felt like I've gotten away with it. Like, I'm like, look, going over the top in the late game with Panharmonicon or a module is great against a mid-range deck, and that is the most powerful version of the deck I can put on the table. But if I take those out, my cards all still do the thing they were going to do. It's just now I can play stuff that prevents me from getting ran over by a train or whatever. So that's been the interesting twist for me, at least so far in the format. We're not early in the format at this point, obviously, but like, I still feel like I have a lot to learn about it. How do we do, Luis?
I think we did all right on the grading, on the set review. My guess is the areas where I think we missed the most, like individual cards, sure, like Midnight Oil, for example, like that is definitely a card where we like reevaluated it even like 2 days later. Yeah. And some of the cards we talked about on this show, I think overall this was a challenging set to accurately review beforehand. And I think we were aware of that, so that meant we were less off than we could have been, because we said, like, these are build-arounds, these are the kind of things you want to go with these cards, but we don't know how good they are, and we didn't really try to take too big a stab at saying, like, this card is great, this card is terrible. And
yes, I think which is our general style for set reviews.
Yeah, and I think that's makes the set review less precise, but I think it's just because we know that we're not going to get, Era of Innovation. How good is this card? Like, I don't know.
Right.
And we're not gonna get that in the set review. So I think given those constraints, we did well.
I think so too. And I have to say, I was proud. I listened to a lot of the set review today, prepping for the show and kind of picking some of the cards to talk about. And I think that it would be a disservice if we hedged, if we said like, well, it might be good, but it might not be on every card just because, we didn't want to take a stand on it. But I was really proud of the way that we didn't do that. What we actually did is we outlined when a card would be good or under what circumstances a card would be good generally and under which circumstances it would fail and said, look, we don't know. But we will know, and this is what we're looking for. And that way, when a listener listens to it, if they're actually listening to the words and not just paying attention to the grade, then they can, keep their eye out as early as possible for those things too. And, it wasn't all rosy. Like you said, we certainly missed stuff, like our reasoning on Midnight Oil was fine, but we didn't really leave the door open for it to just be good. Right. And it turns out that's exactly what it was. So, we still have room to grow there for sure. But like I said, I was actually pretty proud listening and going, yeah, especially going back in time and listening to what we actually knew at the time. Like, I think we ended up hedging pretty well there. So, yes. So good stuff. That was fun. We'll pick the sets we want to do.
Yeah, we won't guarantee do a re-review on all of them. I do this with written reviews for Channel Fireball as well. But just some sets, it's like, this set
one was hard.
Plays out about the way we thought. This Kaladesh was not one of those sets.
No, this set is really, really tough. And we knew it going in. I mean, you heard us talk about Ardar Express for 5 minutes or whatever, because it's like, what the hell does a vehicle do? It's hard to figure out. So anyway, good stuff. That was fun. And like I said, we'll pick certain sets. And hey, if you guys want to, if you find one that you specifically want us to do it for, feel free to let us know. You can do that pretty easily. You can find us, in fact, on social media, Marshall_LR. And Luis is LSV. You can also email us, lr@lrcast.com. You can find everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com. Right on the front page, too, you can find links to, like Luis's stream. You can find links to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, all of that kind of stuff. The LRcast subreddit. It's all there. All the links are right on the front just because I wanted to make it kind of a hub for anything you needed for LR. Of course, I want to thank our sponsor, channelfireball.com. Make sure you check them out for all of your Magic needs. If you need some singles for a constructed deck, that's where you want to go. They're going to have them there. They're going to get them out to you quickly. They have fair prices and good customer service. And if you need to sell cards back, hey, this is the best way to do it. You go onto their website, you punch in all the cards that you have, you send it to them in an envelope, they get it turned around for you nice and quick, and they'll get you your money. The neat part is, too, is that if you want to get more Magic, because of course you want to get more Magic, you can trade in your cards and get a 30% store credit bonus, which you can use to get boosters or more singles, or, you can trade a bunch of bulk rares in for some big shiny rare that you've always wanted. And you can do that all at channelfireball.com. Thank you to them for sponsoring us. Okay, that's going to do it for this episode of the show. As always, dear listener, we really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us. It means a lot to Luis and I, and it's one of my favorite times of the week is getting to hang out with Luis and of course you. All right, we'll see you next time. What are you doing?
I'm cracking a pack.
Why? We already did a crack a pack, though.
Yes, but Innistrad is on Magic Online this week. Flashback.
Oh.
And I still haven't given you those Innistrad rips from the last Innistrad crack a pack. So I believe it's time for another Innistrad flavor draft crack a pack.
All right. I'm into it. This is a good use.
To go over the rules once again, for flavor draft, it's less about what the card says and more about what the card should do. And, we're going to go over specific interactions. So you play a game of Magic like normal, but then when you have an interaction like, say, Blazing Torch against One-Eyed Scarecrow, clearly the Blazing Torch will light the Scarecrow on fire and destroy it. So yes. It trumps the Magic rules in that particular case.
So he gets a bonus there. Okay.
So we're going to do a crack-a-pack here, and we're going to talk about particular differences between what's printed on the card and what would also be on the card, or how the card would play in the flavor draft, and that impacts our picks. So let's start with Gruesome Deformity. This is black for an aura that enchanted creature has Intimidate. This card's actually worse in a flavor draft because not only does it not have an effect on creatures that are already gruesome, It also doesn't intimidate creatures that are gruesome, because if you're gruesome, you're not then intimidated by other gruesome creatures. So
that's
that
good.
one's a pretty easy no pick, because it is already a bad card, and now it just gets worse. Next up, we have Grave Bramble. It says 1 green for a 3/4 plant. It has Defender and Protection from zombies. This is a call out to plants versus zombies. This plays pretty straight up in Flavor Draft. It certainly can't move, and the fact that it's protection from zombies actually does make a lot of sense. So Grave Bramble, still not a very good card, but at least one that its value isn't impacted significantly.
Okay.
Next up, we have Abyssinian Priest, 1 and a white for a 1/2 human cleric, 1 tap. Tap target a non-human creature. So one of the differences between this in Flavor Draft and normal draft is I'm judging it that the priest does not smite things that it thinks are human. So things that pass as human, that look human enough, it's probably not going to go after. So its ability gets significantly weaker if you can argue that, this vampire is a little bit more well concealed, or perhaps this skulking rogue of some kind that does not looks sufficiently human. Since I think that the priest, she's not going to use her magic on a human. That's the whole idea. So if you can make the argument that your creature looks like a human, clearly Abyssinian Priest is not going to go after them. That being said, she's still a very good card, probably our pick right now.
Okay.
Orchard Spirit. This is 2 and a green for a 2/2 spirit. It can't be blocked except by creatures with flying or reach. Now, I never really understood this card and why it had this ability. And it's also sitting on a tree branch. So my guess is that anything that's sufficiently large can also block it. So I'm going to say that anything that's like a 4/4 or greater can also block Orchard Spirit. So that does make this card a lot worse.
Okay.
Next up, we have Ghoul Caller's Bell. Oh, we opened this one in the last Innistrad Crack a Pack, and I'm pretty sure the same logic holds. This is an artifact for 1 mana. You tap to mill each player for 1.
What was the logic again?
Because it's a Ghoul Caller's Bell, if you mill a ghoul, you get control of the ghoul. I think that's what I said last time. And if
it rings the bell, it comes running?
And if I didn't, that is just the right ruling. So Ghoul Caller's Bell seems awesome.
Wow. All right.
So I'm going to go ahead, and ghoul, of course, could mean zombie in this particular context.
Oh, then it's really good.
It's actually better than Abyssinian Priest. So Ghoul Caller's Bell, a huge winner here. Huh? Spectral Flight, 1 and a blue, enchanted creature gets +2/+2, and flying. It's an aura. The way I see this card is it only actually works on things that are spectral, because it's giving spectral things flight. So I'm going to say this card is significantly weaker. It already was kind of borderline, but the fact that it only works on spirits, definitely not good.
Okay.
Ghoul Raiser, 1 black, 2/2 zombie. When Ghoul Raiser enters the battlefield, return a zombie card at random from your graveyard to your hand. This plays about as well as you would expect. I think it's worse than Ghoul Caller's Bell and Abyssinian Priest, but something to keep in mind.
Okay.
Oh, Chapelgeist, 1 white, 2/3 flying. See, the problem with this card is it actually can't leave the chapel. Like, it's a Chapelgeist that's haunting the chapel. You're the person who played it. Presumably you control the chapel, so this has Defender now. So,
okay. I mean, it says Chapelgeist right in the name, like it's not a regular Geist.
And it says Death has bound it with chains of past regrets. So, yeah, I'm going to say this definitely has Defender now. Chapelgeist, way lower in the power rankings.
Wait, doesn't it have flying?
It does. It has flying and defense.
Chains?
Yeah, I guess I don't know how that...
It's hard to fly around when you're chained down to something. I'm just saying.
Pitchburn Devils, 4 and a red, 3/3. When Pitchburn Devil dies, it deals 3 damage to a creature or player. The fact that it can pitch burn at its opponent means I feel like it should you be able to use the ability without dying. It throws things at them. So I'm going to say this also has the enters the battlefield ability, which makes it great. I think this is
what? Okay.
Look, I'm a flavor judge. This is the ruling.
Yeah,
so
I'm not
Devils
arguing.
now has the enter the battlefield ability.
I'll just stand over here aghast at your ruling, but I'm not going to argue.
Hamlet Captain, 1 and a green, 2/2.
Hammy.
When a Hamlet Captain attacks or blocks, other human creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn. Nothing particularly special going on here. There aren't really any Hamlets represented on cards, so there's no real different modifications happening.
Okay. It doesn't have Hamlet Walk?
No. Next up, we have Bitterheart Witch, 4 and a black for a 1/2 Death Touch. When Bitterheart Witch dies, you may search the library for a curse card and put it on the battlefield attached to target player. The only exception here is if you have a Curse of the Pierced Heart, you have to get it with Bitterheart Witch. So that makes her a little bit worse, but there's still a lot of different curses you can get. Maybe you don't include Curse of the Pierced Heart, because she definitely is going after that one.
For sure.
Ooh, Geist Catcher's Rig. This is 6 mana for a 4/5. Artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you may have it deal 4 damage to target creature with flying. All right, so clearly it's a Geist Catcher's Rig. So it can't hit only any creature with flying. It can only hit Geists. That's just step one. But it's also a catcher. It's not it's not killing them. So actually, you gain control of the Geist. So
you gain control of the Geist.
Well, you caught it. What else are you going to do?
I thought you were going to have it be, like a fairgrounds warden.
Well,
it catches the Geist.
Yes, it catches it. You gain control of it.
Okay, yeah.
But there are a lot
flavor
of
ruling has been issued.
I'm still saying Pitchburn Devils is better. Ooh, next up for our flip card, we have Grizzled Outcasts. 4 and a green, 4/4 flips into a 7/7.
Okay.
So,
what's it called on the other side?
It's a Kralin Horde Wontons. So, not like the
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. These actually work out pretty well for how for what they have written. So I'm going to say that Grizzled Outcasts, no particular drawbacks in Flavor Draft. But last up we have Evil Twin. It says 2 blue-black, 0/0 shapeshifter. Enters the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it gains blue-black tap, destroy target creature with the same name as this creature. Honestly, this card's like a flavor home run already.
It is.
The only modification is you need to pick which one's evil and draw a little goatee on it. Because that is how you signify an Evil Twin. So,
doesn't one of them have a goatee in the art?
No, unfortunately not. They really should. So I'm going to say Evil Twin is by far and away the best pick in a Flavor Draft. And if you open an Evil Twin in a Flavor Draft, come on, that's the whole point.
As long as you have a Sharpie with you.
Also, I'll be bringing this Evil Twin when I bring the other cards from the Innistrad Cracker Pack.
If you don't put a goatee on it,
oh, there will be a goatee.